welcome everyone to Johns Hopkins Ice. It's good to see a lot of familiar faces. We're really pleased to be able to have a space for a terrific group of SCICE students to share some insights from what was a really fun and interesting trip in January to Pakistan. I'm Professor Joshua White. I teach in the South Asia program here. And this trip was the first time that a group of SCICE students have gone to Pakistan on a study trip. For some reason, good reason, the dean let us do it without trouble. And I think we were able to experience a side of Pakistan and a set of issues in Pakistan that graduate students don't often get to see, graduate students from the United States. So we had a terrific time. We spent about a week in Islamabad and a week in Lahore studying energy issues in Pakistan. And really talking to a wide range of people. You'll hear about that from the students. And I had spent time working on US-Pakistan relations and local governance issues and regional politics and security. But it was the first time that I had delved at any depth into these energy issues. So it was really exciting for me. This was sort of born out of a partnership that SCICE has with LUMS in Lahore, which is probably Pakistan's leading private sector university. And the trip was funded in part through the grant that SCICE has from the Star Foundation and also a private Pakistani donor who wanted SCICE students to be able to experience Pakistan. So this is, we're going to try to be doing more events on Pakistan that focus on issues outside of the traditional security sphere. And this is just one of these, the first of these that we're proud to do. I'll ask Professor Urpelainen, who heads our energy program, to say a few words. He was my co-conspirator. And then we'll turn it over to the students for some presentation and Q&A.
Right, thanks everybody for joining us today. I'm very happy to see the fruit of this very, very exciting trip. We had a great time in Pakistan, and I think for me what made this particularly exciting is that when we think of the study of energy issues in South Asia, we almost always think of India. And India, of course, is a large country. It's very important, but it's also a country that we've studied very extensively. There's a lot of data, there's a lot of people studying it. Most of the basic issues are quite well understood among the people who study this. Pakistan is not a country that is well understood. When I went to Pakistan with our students and my co-conspirator Josh, I didn't really have a very good understanding of all the challenges, and Pakistan is a very interesting country to look at in comparison to India. One thing I learned is that Pakistan has made, in some sense, some of the same mistakes that India had done, except on a larger scale, and it has created an even worse challenge for itself in dealing with the power sector. And that to me was very fascinating to see how these countries had quite different experiences in the 1990s and in the 2000s because of some of these security challenges, relationships with other countries. Pakistan faced some larger challenges, and those really translated into interesting outcomes in the power sector. So I'm very much looking forward to hearing the presentation from the students who can tell us all about circular debt and all these other exciting issues in the Pakistani energy sector. Please.
Should we introduce ourselves? Yeah, great. So we're going to start with some student introductions. So my name is John Danilowitz. I'm a second-year South Asia concentrator here at SCICE. I had lived in Pakistan previously when I was younger, before I went on this trip, but this has been an opportunity for me to kind of really both engage with a country that I know and don't know, but also to explore a sector that was pretty unclear to me.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Edwards. I'm also a second-year South Asia concentrator. Also my second time in Pakistan, spent a year teaching English there, but this was an opportunity to explore a different set of problems and meet just the elite class of Pakistan.
My name's Sam Reynolds. I'm a second-year student in the Energy Resource and Environment program. Never been to Pakistan, never thought I would go. The interest was mainly in CPAC, the Belt and Road. I had some background in that, and just excited to see what Pakistan is really doing with its electricity market design and how that's rolling out. So we'll talk about that.
Hi, my name's Aaron Ng. I'm a second-year ERE student. I also never knew, I thought I would go to Pakistan, but I'm really glad I did. It was my first step.
Hi everyone, my name is Michael. I'm also a second year ERE concentrator. It's my first time in South Asia, so I really enjoyed the opportunity to get to go study that region. I had spent the summer studying energy in Central America, so I was able to apply some of that to South Asia, but yeah, it was a great learning opportunity.
Hi, my name is Gwen. I'm a second year ERE concentrator. I did my first year at the Hawkins Benching Center, and this trip was my first time to South Asia. It was really good to apply some of the knowledge from my ERE coursework in a new area.
Hi, my name is Danny. I'm also a second year ERE student, also first timer in South Asia region. I was interesting to see a developing country, and the developing country, like how their effort to develop energy and the electricity market.
Hi, my name is Sharon. I'm a second year South Asia student. It's not my first time in South Asia, but it was my first time in Pakistan, and I had such a wonderful time there. I had not much knowledge of electricity markets, power markets at all. However, before the trip, on the trip, and post, I got a very intimate knowledge of circular debt. So I'm excited to share that with you guys today.
Perfect, and with that, we're going to start. So as Professor White and Professor Urpelainen have already mentioned, this was a joint trip between the ERE program and the South Asia Studies program. This was our attempt to kind of meld the two, a regional specialty and a functional specialty, kind of play to SAIS's strengths and kind of come up with a meaningful understanding of a very complicated situation. So Prime Minister Imran Khan's government has an opportunity to effect meaningful reforms to a very beleaguered energy sector. In and of itself, that means nothing to some people, right? Why do you care about Pakistan? Why do you care about the Pakistani energy sector? No, nonetheless. But Pakistan provides a unique example because it's an example of a country that has done things both very, very well and very, very poorly. Added to that, Pakistan's greater geopolitical importance as a country of nearly 200 million people, a nuclear armed state in a very unstable region, and there's a lot of reasons for us to care about Pakistan. And so, over the course of these 2 weeks, we were, as mentioned, in Islamabad, where we primarily talked to central government figures, we talked to think tanks, and then when we moved down to Lahore, which is sort of Pakistan's second city, we engaged with a much wider array of civil society and energy groups, energy business groups. The stakeholders we met ranged from provincial governments to General Electric to university academics. This is a great time to point out that, as Professor White mentioned, we worked heavily with LUMS, but this also couldn't have been done without the help of the American Institute of Pakistan Studies, the assistance of the governments of both Pakistan and the United States. And over the course of our engagement, we kind of focused on, well, we didn't know what we were getting into when we went in. Let's be completely honest, right? It's a group of 10 college students, or grad students who are told to come right after the end of winter break. You're going to Pakistan for 2 weeks, so do a lot of research. So our research was rudimentary, let's say, but over the course of 2 weeks, we came away with a hopeful yet nuanced understanding of the Pakistani energy sector. It's very often in this town for people to talk about all the issues facing Pakistan, particularly security issues, and it kind of creates a very monotonous and very uninteresting portrait of the country. And so this was a great way for us to kind of look at a beleaguered sector of Pakistan's economy, but also look for the multiple silver linings and paths forward. So our report developed into 3 broad parts. The first part examined structural problems in the energy sector, starting with planning. At one point in the 1990s, Pakistan was held up worldwide as an example of a power sector that everyone should emulate. That is not the case in 2019, and that can largely be explained by the faulty planning system that they have. This mysterious circular debt issue, which is on everyone's tongue, but few people can explain it, and even fewer people have any idea how to address it. Once we kind of developed the contours of the structural programs, we looked into where Pakistan can invest its limited resources. First and foremost, we start looking at issues of transmissions and distribution. Pakistan is a country that produces enough energy for everyone who has electricity access to potentially never have a blackout. But the country has significant issues with blackouts. Why is that? We looked at Pakistan's import dependence. Pakistan is, again, a country that sits on extensive endowments, and both in terms of renewable energy and thermal sources, and yet it is heavily dependent on imports. Relatedly, we looked at the topic du jour, Chinese investment. We looked at CPAC. We looked at how CPAC has influenced the import dependence, but how it's also helped Pakistan move forward. And after that, we kind of looked towards something that is both popular to talk about here in DC and also a really hopeful story for Pakistan. It's substantial renewable endowments, but also the contradictory ways in which the reduction in price of renewables has actually complicated and made it more difficult to invest in them in certain cases. Finally, having done the easy stuff, which is throw your money here and fix it, we turn to the politically more complicated issues of reforms and innovations in regulation and competition. We look at Pakistan's convoluted regulation system and how it can be better streamlined and strengthened. And we also look at the ways that competition can be introduced into the system to not replace everything, but move bit by bit towards a more competitive and rational tariff setting structure. That being said, I'm not an energy guy, I'm a Pakistan guy, and I'm good at standing in front of a room and talking about things I know nothing about. So for that reason, I'm going to hand things over to my more informed colleagues who are going to give you the rest of the information. 4 of us are going to present, but we're all going to be fielding questions based on our responsive sectors. So please hold your questions till the end, and then we'll hopefully have a fruitful discussion. Thank you. Also, I can hit buttons.
All right, thanks, John. As John mentioned, there are several structural issues in the Pakistani energy sector. I know the org chart is a little small, but you'll see here in these 2 little boxes that the Ministry of Energy is split up between the Petroleum Division and the Power Division. And what we learned is that we don't really talk to each other. There's very little institutional cooperation, and that sort of leads to a lack of coordinated planning when it comes to policies. Also, with the electricity market reform caused by or due to sort of changes in government and a lot of ad hoc reactive planning with the Water and Power Development Authority, WAPDA, when that fragmented, it created a lot of different state-run institutions that sort of acted on their own. And with that, as you can see, there are a lot of institutions that aren't really coordinating with each other. It's really hard to have a national forward-looking plan. Fortunately, in the recent government, in the top left box, they've set up a task force, and I know also the planning committee is looking towards long-term planning now that they've realized the situation in Pakistan. But as we'll talk more, as we go through the presentation, we'll see a little more about how that will play out.
Okay, so I get the pleasure of trying to explain what circular debt is. Circular debt is actually fascinating because it really explains how the inefficiencies in the power sector can affect the macroeconomic picture as a whole, right? And circular debt explains how debts accumulate within the supply chain of the electricity sector and then subsequently have effects on how electricity is consumed, what the demand is, and then how those exacerbate the same problems that caused it. So let's get into it. We're talking about the flow of money here, right? Consumers have to pay for electricity. They have to pay distribution companies. The government of Pakistan has huge subsidies on electricity that's supposed to help consumers do that. Distribution companies then, there are 9 of them. Distribution companies then buy electricity from a single purchasing agency that's responsible for negotiating with generators, and they then buy electricity from generators. So again, the single buyer, National Transmission and Distribution Company, is responsible for paying the generators. The generators in turn have fuel suppliers that they have to pay. You know, they have contractual agreements for imported fuels, natural gas. We hear about LNG, coal from South Africa. Now, what happens when the consumers don't pay and the government doesn't pay, right? Consumers are facing technical and non-technical losses, non-technical being theft and things like that. Technical losses are losses in the lines, inefficiency of heat transfers throughout the electricity system, right? The government of Pakistan has these huge subsidies that it's promised to compensate. So there's a regulator that sets an optimal price of that electricity. The government says, no, 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 we want a much lower price. Our consumers, our political constituency wants a lower price. So we're going to subsidize that difference, right? The government doesn't actually pay that subsidy. It can't. It's got a lot of other commitments. So in turn, the distribution companies don't get their money, right? Then they don't pay the national transmission and distribution company that doesn't pay the generators, which can't follow through on their fuel suppliers. How does this affect the whole picture in Pakistan? One, we get reduced industrial demand. We get inefficiencies in how supply is actually being managed, how generators are producing electricity, uncertainty in contracts, things like that. And that really affects how industries produce, how the economy functions. And we also get uncertainty of supply, which manifests in the form of load shedding, which you may or may not know are scheduled blackouts. When the government doesn't have enough power, they say, we're going to have this load shedding policy. And then those, to come back to the beginning, government of Pakistan collects even less revenue from taxes, from industries and things like that, and consumers consume even less electricity. The system's unreliable. You know, why not just defect from the grid, build our own kind of residential systems and things like that. So we'll talk more about off-grid later, but that's the circular debt. Now, what's the scale of the problem that we're talking about? In Pakistan, it's massive. So I mentioned the drivers. We've got technical losses and non-technical losses, theft in consumers. And then we've got this government's uniform electricity tariff policy, right? That's the thing. The government says it's going to be equal for everybody. It's going to be much lower prices. And as far as the scale, we're talking about 4% of GDP. This uniform tariff policy, these electricity subsidies, are the fourth largest government expenditure in Pakistan. It's really, really massive. 1.6 trillion Pakistani rupees in 2019. That's about $11.3 billion. So how do we fix this? And that's a problem. That's the $1 million, or I guess $11.3 billion question that no one has an answer to. Certain steps to address it include the creation of sukuks, which are Islamic bonds that allow for interest collection without violating Muslim code. We have bailout packages from multilateral banks. The banks recognize that this circular problem is huge, right? So we have the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank, the IMF. They're all saying, Pakistan, you have to get your act together. Our packages are contingent on you fixing the electricity sector. That's how much of a role it plays. And then we have theft programs to prevent people from stealing off the grid. And again, a lot of the people that we met with didn't have an answer to this question. So I'm going to pass it on.
Thanks, Sam. As you can see, Pakistan isn't there's a fiscal constraint in Pakistan from the circular debt issue. So much of the story with solving the load shedding issue within the electricity sector is where to invest. And many of the recent investments that we've seen to solve this load shedding issue and perceived supply and demand gap is to invest in generation. But when there's an overinvestment in generation, which some of the people we talked to said that there was an undersupply, but I think our most reliable source said that there was an oversupply of generation. You would think that the people would be served, the electricity would be getting there, but there's in the power sector, there's another issue that you have to think about, and that's the grid, that's transmission and distribution. And what we learned was that there was a rather relative underinvestment in transmission and distribution, and there were a lot of issues with the T&D system. The first off is that the system was very old. There weren't very recent modifications, and that leads to a lot of the line losses that Sam was talking about. And another thing is when you do invest highly in generation, a grid can only take so much electricity lines only have so much capacity to transport certain watt hours across vast distances to get it to the end user. So when you have too much generation but not enough transmission or distribution lines to transport that electricity, it gets caught up. So that's why we think that balancing investments between generation and transmission and distribution would go a long way in solving a lot of the issues that we've seen.
Okay, so we've talked about some of the macro problems. This is yet another driver of some of those macroeconomic problems, but it's also in some ways an opportunity. So if you're looking at the supply side of Pakistan's energy, most of their energy comes from imports rather than from local sources. And most of it is thermal, so mostly oil or coal. And we see a mix of independent power producers, IPPs, or GenCos, which are more just government generation companies. But still, it's largely fossil fuel driven. And most of that imported fuel is supported by government FSAs, which is the fuel supply agreements. Now the problem here is that the FSAs that the Pakistani government has signed have been surprisingly long-term contracts. You have 15 to 30-year fuel supply agreements with the UAE, with Qatar, with South Africa, with Saudi Arabia, or I already said Saudi Arabia, with China. And so they're locked into these long-term agreements, and Nawaz Sharif's government did want to move towards LNG, maybe a cleaner source of energy, but now Pakistan is locked into long-term agreements with Qatar for their LNG or for their other sources of energy. And even with China, some of their contracts are longer term, and even though they're building coal plants on Pakistani soil, a lot of the financing is coming from China. Most of the financing is coming from China, and most of the profits will probably also go back to China. And so this creates a problem. And let's see, where you are depleting your foreign reserves. And we've seen that crisis play out in the past year. You have a current account deficit overall and just a general supply-demand imbalance. As I think Aaron referenced, some of the people that we talked to mentioned that Pakistan has an oversupply of energy now. They have more than enough natural gas. They have all these tar coal resources. There's more than enough energy, but with all your transmission and distribution losses, with your theft, all these other problems, it still presents a bit of an imbalance with your supply and demand. And so you still see quite a bit of load shedding and people not having access to electricity consistently. So opportunities with this, we saw some opportunities to increase the domestic supply, especially in renewables. Pakistan has a lot of opportunities for wind and solar projects and a lot of resources there. If the government is interested, but that would probably require renegotiating some of those agreements with other countries, which is a bit of an issue politically, and difficult to know if Pakistan would actually get a positive outcome there if you're trying to renegotiate something that is in the other country's favor. And of course, there are opportunities to invest in coal, and we've seen some of that in the news recently with at least one of the tar coal projects coming online these days. So. CPAC. Of course, we could not go on this trip without running into CPAC throughout all of our meetings. CPAC is the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. It's Pakistan's branch of the China Belt and Road Initiative. And China has really invested quite heavily into Pakistan, especially in coal and LNG. Initially, we heard when people would talk about CPAC, they would say, well, Pakistan needed energy, needed more supply, and China was the only country interested in helping us. And so it was just we didn't really have any other options. This was our option, and they gave us a decent deal. But these days, we noticed that there's been a waning enthusiasm, especially among the elite and the people that we talked to. They say it was necessary at the time, but maybe in the long run it wasn't such a good option. Most of those projects are coal-based, and there's some question about how clean they actually are. China says they meet the minimum global standards for environmental standards, but they're still not the best clean coal projects out there. So they're maybe about mid-range as far as how clean those coal projects are. And then something that we kind of came away with at the end was that really Pakistan's government gives great deals for people interested in investing in the energy space, in the sense that Pakistan's government tends to take on quite a bit of risk, in that they will give very hefty subsidies for, they will give fairly good tariff, which is the energy price, the consumer price. And so really, if people are interested in investing in Pakistan in their energy sector, they could get a good deal. And it's just that the Chinese have really profited the most in this day and age from that opportunity space. So.
Awesome. I get to talk about renewables. I did not put this picture there, but I can neither confirm nor deny whether I actually did hug a solar panel. So renewables are a huge opportunity in Pakistan, right? Pakistan is the 8th most susceptible country in the entire world to climate change. We hear all these studies that say Pakistan is going to run out of water by 2025. Now, you can debate those studies, but the sentiment is still the same. Pakistan is going to be strongly affected by changing regional weather patterns. So why is it investing heavily in coal and natural gas and other fossil fuels that will exacerbate the same problem? Pakistan has a large resource base for renewables, particularly in the southeastern Sindh province. There's huge amounts of solar radiation and there's very large wind speeds. There are really, I would say, 4 problems or 4 reasons why Pakistan has not invested in renewables so far. The first is that in the early 2000s, Pakistan's electricity demand was growing very quickly. People were getting air conditioners and appliances, and they had all these new demands to fill, so they invested very heavily in baseload generation sources, which are sources that come online and stay online. They're there to meet demand at all times. So these are things like coal-fired power plants, nuclear plants, and hydro plants, things that are easily running. So hydro is 27% of the electricity mix in Pakistan. Now another reason, I mentioned baseload power, another reason is that these sources, these baseload power sources, are very inflexible. Now what does that mean? When the sun rises, it's just a matter of time before solar panels kick into full output, right? It's just a matter of an hour or so. So you have to have other generation sources that can respond very quickly to those solar panels coming online, those wind turbines going offline. And the problem with baseload power is that things like nuclear and coal take a very long time to turn on. So they don't necessarily accommodate renewables in the same way that natural gas does or hydro does. And that's a major problem. A third reason is that Pakistan has entered into long-term power purchase agreements with these companies, with these coal providers, with these nuclear deals. And those are, Stephanie mentioned, those are very difficult to get out of. There's another problem, and that is Pakistan has entered into PPAs with renewable power plants, right? So say in 2014, Pakistan tried to build one of the largest solar farms in the entire world at the time, the Quaid-e-Azam solar park in central Pakistan. And at the time, the per kilowatt hour price of that electricity from that plant was about 13.5 cents, 14 cents, right? Since then, since it was installed, solar now costs about 4 cents, right? So as that was happening, Pakistan had built this renewable park, they had entered into a long-term power purchase agreement, and then the price of solar fell off the table. And so rather than continue to build and complete that solar park, they just said it's not a good deal anymore, we're gonna stop doing it. And so that kind of, it's interesting in the way that the uncertainty of the prices in renewables is affecting how Pakistan kind of hesitantly approaches them, right? And let's see, the fourth reason is that a lot of the times we heard in our meetings with officials, Pakistan isn't responsible for climate change. Its per capita emissions are tiny compared to China and US, right? Why should Pakistan be obligated to respond to the climate problem? So that was a big hurdle that we saw. Now, what are the upsides? Let's get to some positives. I would say, again, there are 4 real positive things about this situation. The first is that the uncertainty of prices is also a benefit for renewables. So that we're seeing such cheap wind and solar nowadays that it's easy to make the economic argument rather than the moral argument for why Pakistan should be dealing with climate change. Another opportunity is this new government. The PTI government has really committed tentatively to deploying renewables. It released a draft renewables plan in April, I believe, April, that said they want to increase their share and renewable share of the energy mix from 2.5% currently to 25% by 2030, 2040, something like that. Another opportunity or another positive that we saw is that there is a large space for off-grid renewables, right? So Pakistan is currently only 75% electrified. 25% of people in one of the most populated countries in the world do not receive power. However, that means that Pakistan could essentially leapfrog over the necessary transmission and distribution investments and just get straight to off-grid, right? And another benefit about that is that a large number of homes in Pakistan, if you've ever been, you'll see most of the time have batteries lying in their house, and these are lead acid batteries. They're basically repurposed truck batteries that people are using. Because load shedding and blackouts were so frequent, people started using these truck batteries as a way to store power. Now they're really inefficient and there's a lot of problems, but the university that put us up for a week in Lahore was doing a lot of research on fixing those, refurbishing those lead acid batteries to operate more efficiently with wind and solar. And now there's one more opportunity, and I think Michael was a huge fan of this idea, was building solar panels on existing hydro plants and hydro storage facilities. And think about it, there's a huge lake or a river with water, and why not just put floating solar units on there? The transmission and distribution lines are already connecting that plant, so that would be a major opportunity, especially given how much hydro Pakistan has. Okay. Now next I'm going to talk about the role of the independent regulator. Now before we get to that, I'm actually going to jump back to this org chart here, right? And it's tiny, you can't really see it, but this is NEPRA. NEPRA is the independent regulator of Pakistan's electricity system. In the 1990s, it was mentioned before by Aaron, I think, that Pakistan was a leader in kind of creating a market for the electricity sector and having the market determine prices rather than the government. Now that's really been a failure. That hasn't happened. But in the 90s, there was this huge push to create an independent regulator who would just kind of facilitate the marketplace. And in 1997, it created this NEPRA. NEPRA, go back here. NEPRA is responsible for determining prices autonomously from the government. It's also responsible for granting licenses to IPPs, independent power plants. And it's really in charge of the whole unbundling process of Pakistan's electricity sector, going from a vertically integrated monopoly that was doing all the work to splitting those up into different generators and different distribution companies, different people that could potentially participate in a marketplace to get a supply and demand determination of what the electricity price should be, right? So how does NEPRA determine the optimal price? The optimal price being high enough to incentivize generators, but low enough to keep the people happy. And what it does is NEPRA theoretically approves distribution companies and generators' expenditures, and then adds a fair rate of return on top of that. This is called a cost of service regulation. So NEPRA determines that price. It's usually pretty high because of the amount of imported fuel. And the government, I mentioned its uniform tariff policy, sets a much lower price, and that really exacerbates the circular debt problem. This has gotten worse in recent years. This is one of those trends that's not improving. The government in 2016 and 2017 really passed amendments to try and bring NEPRA from that independent position under the guise of the Ministry of Energy, and to have it more responsive to directives by the federal ministries to its, as for its decision making. And this has really been a huge problem. As I mentioned, multilateral banks, the World Bank, the IMF, the Asian Development Bank, these are all bailout packages that are contingent upon Pakistan maintaining the autonomy of its regulator. Now, why doesn't the government want to do that? It says that NEPRA is not actually functioning the way it should have. There's so many delays for CPAC projects and for investments in the generation that the regulator is not really functioning right. So you have kind of this disagreement between how multilaterals think the electricity system should work and how the government is telling them it's working.
So a space that we saw for some opportunities for reform was competitive bidding. And there were two types of competitive bidding that we looked at. One was in the energy pricing or consumer prices tariffs. And then the other is just general projects, just, you know, building a coal plant or whatever. And so what that means is we were thinking that instead of the government just making an agreement with the country, with China or whoever, that they open up, you know, this project to investors to see who is most interested, they can bid, and then, you know, the most profitable bid wins the day. And so that's an example in the project space. In the tariff space, you know, different companies can offer a bid for lower prices for various energy sources. And so Pakistan has some opportunities to kind of move forward in this and have some market reform in this area. There was, although one story kind of came up a few times that showed how Pakistan has tried out competitive bidding in some ways, and it has either been to play political games or has not been wholly successful. One of those examples was in the tariff space when Qaid-e-Azam Solar Park was being built. In the middle of that, NEPRA had given them a very high tariff rate, 17%, and then all of a sudden, the government at the time wants to move towards LNG, wants to lock into these long-term agreements, and so rather than letting these solar projects continue, all of a sudden NEPRA says, we're going to go to competitive bidding just for solar, and all of a sudden the price tanks, and then your projects go in limbo. And so that was one example where NEPRA has mostly avoided competitive bidding, but in solar they went into competitive bidding and dropped down prices, and now it's no longer profitable to go into that space. And so if the government were to overall move towards competitive bidding for all their energy sources, were to start to do it in such a way where there is some transitional regulation, it could work over the long term and be helpful for the market overall on a grand scale, long-term scale. But to just do it immediately for one sector in an attempt to play a political game just has not been helpful, to see more renewables in Pakistan's energy mix. So that was one example that came up a few times where we saw something that could be very helpful for Pakistan's energy space, a great opportunity to move towards market reform, but was used in such a way that was not actually helpful in the long run. Oh, and sorry, the last thing. And there is another program that they're trying out with competitive bidding, more on the just general project type of competitive bidding. And that's the Sin Solar Energy Project. And so the World Bank is opening up that project to outside investors to see who's most interested. And so we'll kind of see how that goes. And then right now it's just at the very beginning stages. So that might be, if it's successful, maybe something that Pakistan can point to and then use that as an example for other projects.
So at the beginning, I promised you a tempered or cautiously optimistic picture, and that might not be where you're at right now, but I have 2 points that I want to get across. One, there's free food coming, so be optimistic about that. But 2, it's important to put Pakistan's current situation in context. We've heard some references to previous governments, and a decade ago, Pakistan was transitioning away from dictatorship, was in the middle of a dire security crisis, and the Pakistani government at the time was overwhelmed and unable to meet the demands. The previous government, before this current one, came in with a singular promise: we are going to meet this generation gap. And it was dirty, and it was expensive, and it was roughshod, but they did it. When we were in Pakistan over this January, I remember there being one blackout, maybe, and it was temporary and it went like that. 10 years ago, there would have been hours and hours and hours on end in the capital, in Lahore, in these other cities. And so this isn't to say that Pakistan's current situation is by any means perfect, but it has made tremendous strides with very limited resources. If you guys have been hearing about Pakistan at all in the last month or 2, I'm going to guess it's not because of the energy sector. The Pakistani government has tremendous strains under it, from the security context, from the political context, from all other sorts of the economic pressures, and yet it is continuing to move ahead. The Khan administration has taken some important and politically more dangerous steps in recent months. Towards the very beginning of his administration, the Prime Minister created a special task force on energy reforms, which has meaningful membership and powers. And earlier this year, they released an energy-focused mini-budget, which did things like restart this move towards renewable funding. When we were in this Lahore, we talked with a solar company that said, for 2 years we haven't had any programs on a utility scale approved. Now we finally have hope that these utility scale projects are going to happen. But these are insufficient in and of themselves, and extraordinary political will be required. Again, we always heard reference to these nebulous vested interests, these mysterious figures in the back of the Pakistani political economy that controlled everything because they were getting rich. Now, part of this is conspiracy, but part of this is truth. Part of it is there are people who benefit from the way this system currently works. These are politically powerful people. These are politically powerful, economically powerful organizations. And in order to move past the current impasse, the government will have to both co-opt and convince these vested interests to work with them. What's going to come out on the other end isn't going to be perfect. It's not going to be pretty. I don't think that our report or our suggestions here are all encompassing, but I think they demonstrate an effective way for Pakistan to move forward. Kind of as an addendum, in recent days, if you've been paying attention, you've probably seen that the IMF and Pakistan have recently reached an agreement in principle on reforms moving forward. We're not quite sure what those are going to look like. You've seen that there has been reshuffling in the cabinet. We're not quite sure why that's happening. Part of this is the natural process of politics. No one wants to see how the kebab is made, right? But the other thing is that this is a difficult task to handle. When people fail at reform, it's good that sometimes they're removed. So it's going to be messy, it's going to be dirty, but it's necessary. And if Pakistan is truly going to kind of embrace its position at the beginning of the next century, these reforms are going to be a very necessary part of that. And with that, thank you. We have questions and answers. Someone's going to field them. So if we've provoked you in any ways, let us know how wrong we are.
Get up with her.
Congratulations, this sounds like an immense undertaking, and I'm very glad somebody else is geeking out on energy in Pakistan. So I'm in my 5th year, I'm a PhD student on the job market this year over at Georgetown, and I have just completed sort of 2.5 years of studying the K-electric model in Karachi, which I'm sure many people have told you is the flagship and the premier, and this is what we're all aiming for. So my question to you, and I'm treating you like, I would my students, right? What was the impression you got when you went into a country that has immense technical expertise? They're technocrats who know their stuff. They've gone to the best schools, they're electrical engineers, they're civil engineers. They have so much insider knowledge of how the system works. There's no lack of talent and data and expertise. Why do they continue, or why does the government or successive governments continue to make these mistakes? And to the, I'm sorry, I don't know the person who concluded, but the Pakistan expert, as I'm going to call you. The conspiracy theory behind the government being deeply embedded in sort of some, invisible hands sort of pulling the strings in the background. To demystify that, if you were to go to Ghana, if you were to go to Uganda, you would find that there are 2 types of people in government, broadly speaking. The people who've been elected, who don't have the expertise, and the people who have expertise because they've got a stake in making money. And it's often the politically elected people who defer to the people with expertise. So, Nadeem Babar, who I'm sure wowed you with his charm and charisma, also happens to own an IPP. He's not interested in renewables. He says he is, but let's face it, this is like, big pharma in the United States telling you it wants healthcare reform, right? In order to, when you go into a place like this and the people who are talking to you know you want to hear certain things, right? And they're very good at telling you what you want to hear. But the point of a political science degree or the political science lens is to say all politics in some ways is very similar all over the world, who benefits and who's interested. So going back to the question, where do you think the gap is in terms of the government moving from this hyper-contracting model, right? Everything is a contract, everything is about bringing in investments and bringing in these people and bringing in these magic bullets. Where does it switch from that to something that looks like an actual commitment to getting energy to small businesses, getting it to households, getting it to people who are incidentally undergoing something like 12 hours of load shedding right now in Karachi, in a place where, theoretically there's been this enormous reform, ticking all the boxes that the IMF or anybody else has told them to. There are people in the city who don't have access to electricity and are paying for it. So what did this reveal to you as far as working with this kind of government is concerned?
So if I can 2-finger on this.
Yeah.
So I think there's a cop-out answer that I'm going to throw out there, and then I'm going to try to tackle it. One, we didn't go to Karachi to study K-electric for 2 reasons.
But I mean,
because
in
it was
Pakistan in general, because K-electric has been held at this
Right.
model, right?
So that's very interesting. So K-electric has indeed been held as this model. And so just kind of for the room, K-electric, so of all the distribution companies in Pakistan, Karachi is unique. K-electric is kind of this much more profit-driven, privatized organization, kind of what you'd think some technocrat's wet dream of a power generation distribution company, right? And it does not work. It works very poorly. And so this is something that came up repeatedly when we were in meetings. I would bring up, I was like, what about K-electric? This mystical K-electric, tell me what it does right. And they kind of always say, well, one, Karachi's different because Karachi's giant. But 2, we don't really think there's a lot we can learn from K-electric. And so I'll defer to other people with more technical expertise on that. But kind of talking to your point about the quite gregarious characters we met with their own interests, their own stakes, frankly, in the system. The first meeting we had, very first meeting we have, is with people involved with LNG. And we walk in, and they're all immaculately dressed. They're all glad handing us. They have real Starbucks coffee, which no one has Starbucks coffee in Pakistan. It's all garbage Nescafe. And they wow us and they say, LNG is the future. LNG is the baseload. LNG, LNG, LNG. Now, we spend the next 2 weeks being told these guys are swindling us, right? But I think one of the things that I came away with, and I think, I'm not going to speak for the group, but there's a way to leverage self-interest, right? I think there's a plausible case to be made that Nadeem Babar primarily wants to make Nadeem Babar rich. So he can come back to America at some point when the government is out of power and he's on some hit list. He can come back to America and live rich, but yet can be used. LNG, as mentioned, can be used as an effective baseload for renewables. So I don't think that there's definitely a tension. There's definitely self-interest. And there's definitely, in Pakistan, in all sorts of countries, in the United States especially, there are economically and politically powerful people who sometimes can be used to do things that are good for them. Like only Nixon could go to China, maybe only Nadeem Babar can convince them to, adopt 60% renewables. Anybody else?
Yeah, it's a really difficult question. At the same time that the government is promising to keep prices low, they're doing so because that's very politically popular, and we've seen how electricity can be such a salient issue in Pakistan. We've seen the most recent government run on electricity reform, and yet they are not willing to let go of price controls and are unwilling to ensure that everyone in the system is accountable to their own electricity consumption. As far as your question is concerned, are you asking how to convince these people in power to let go of control of the system? Is that your question?
No, I think it's more just how do you get people more accountable, right? I think what I have seen is that business is exceptionally well represented in the Pakistani parliament.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, these people are either businessmen themselves or, have received, like there is anywhere else in the world. Again, I really drive back this point, Johannes has done this in India as well. There are people whose incentives drive these decisions, right? And it's impossible to get away from that. You can leverage it for good, but especially where you've had a history of autocracy, I think increasingly the pool of people who are making these laws and are interested in holding them, implementing them, don't represent that magic, like middle income group who wants both efficiency, transparency, accountability, but is also welfare dependent and can't just opt out of the system by buying a generator.
Mm-hmm.
That representative class is very poorly, that class of people is very poorly represented. And if you talk about, and again, anywhere, Pakistan, Ghana, Uganda, if you think of the constituency that's going to bring about reform, both democratically, economically, and when we talk about investment, why do we need China to invest? Alison Post has written this great book about how they invited local investors to reform the water sector. It can be local businesses that take up, a chunk of Karachi's 16 million population and try to provide locally a little grid, right? Have microgridding, even within a large city. It's been done in Mumbai. So my point being that I think it's important to also see the politics of who's getting represented, right? Even if there is a vote going on, even if somebody like PTI and Imran Khan, who's again very impressive and says all the right things, who is his constituency and how are they being sold what the government is doing?
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
I think that's something to kind of keep in mind.
It is important. I'll just make 2 points. And the first is that this has been done in Pakistan already. During the 90s, they made huge steps towards unbundling their electricity sector. And Pakistan was a leader at the time when other countries were just starting to experiment with unbundling. And so there was a political push. The second point that I'll make is that businesses, the price drops, the price reductions in wind and solar are hugely attractive to businesses around the world. If a competitive bidding system is put in place in which every generator receives the system marginal price, the maximum price necessary to meet demand, and wind and solar prices are near zero for marginal cost. That's all going to be profit, and so, or go to a fixed cost. But I'm optimistic that we will start to see business interests representing wind and solar and clean energy, not for the moral argument in Pakistan, but for the economic argument.
If I could just add one of the things, a couple of things that struck me in hearing a lot of the conversations was trying to think about the biases in this system. And one of the big biases that the team mentioned was there's been a very profound bias toward generation for a very long time. Well, why is that? Well, it's because as Debbie said, in the 1990s, Pakistan was innovative in attracting foreign investment, so they gave sovereign guarantees and they subsidized it, and then they just never changed that model. But also, generation is where big money is, right? Big projects, big money. You can have, tens, hundreds of millions of dollars invested in the course of like a year or two to build something quickly. That's a lot of money flowing in very quickly, and somebody's going to profit from it. So that was one sort of structural bias, and the other one, I think, as they mentioned, was this bias toward control and away from autonomous organizations. And, we heard even in the renewable sector, if somebody wants to set up solar panels on their house, they had to apply to get a license as an independent power producer for their little house, right? It used to take like 6 months, right? And so that control, of course, hurts various companies who aren't politically connected, but ultimately it hurts people who don't have
Karachi's energy grid was monopolized. There's no need for that. Mumbai has 2 power grids. It's the same size. It was because they needed to attract this investor. Right? So don't underestimate the power of really smart, suit-wearing people who want to make a lot of money. It's not just that they're going to invite certain kinds of investment or make it cushy for certain kinds of business. It's that they're going to actively block something that would make it possible for me as a Karachiite to go off the grid. I get so much sunshine every day. Why can't I just put up a solar panel? It's because K Electric would stop making money off me.
I agree with your point, but I think there is optimization with those interests as well. So I'm not disagreeing with you, but I think there is a component where you will get better optimization in the private sector or general privatization when you see in the public sector, even now, the amount of, my area that I focused on was circular debt, the amount that the public sector is losing is beyond, and they are also stuck. They don't want to change. So, your side is maybe vested interest, but the other side is optimization. So I think right now that's kind of where the sector looks like.
Hello, Osmani. I'm a visiting scholar here and also location occupied in Washington, D.C. We do fund some of investment, including energy in Pakistan and the region. 2 quick questions, if you had a chance to look into it, is regional aspect. World Bank and EDB funds CASA 1000 that brings the hydropower from Central Asia to Pakistan, and also the tackling the long 2-decade-long project that brings gas pipeline from Afghanistan all the way to India. India's question mark, but at least Pakistan seems like it's still going on. Have you looked into it? Where the Pakistan will pay for these? What's the market for the imports of energy, and how you see this solving medium, short to medium term energy problem in Pakistan? How do you see the prospect? The question is overall.
You want to take this? I have my own thoughts on imported natural gas. I can't speak to the pipelines so much because I didn't focus on them, but given the state of the LNG export sector worldwide, prices for natural gas are plummeting, right? And they're the lowest we've ever seen. And natural gas is going to be crucial in the further deployment of renewables. So I talked about how to accommodate renewables with flexible resources such as natural gas. And my hope is that those two will complement each other while Pakistan continues to reduce reliance on imports of coal and things like that. That it'll turn more heavily to natural gas as a complement to renewables. So,
I guess the other thing I like the CASA 1000 stuff in particular, is primarily when we discussed it, and most people were somewhat, I don't want to say dismissive, but they weren't really factoring it into their calculations. They said that these projects have been in the works for so long and they've been planned, especially the top people. where they're effectively not considering them in the plans. But when they did come up, people almost always couched them to us in terms of, yeah, I mean, there are benefits for Pakistan in the summer, theoretically, that's when the load is the highest. And I guess that's another thing to mention is that the load in Pakistan, the way it's structured is it's highest in the summer. It's been going up in the summer year on year on year because people are buying more air conditioners. So the winter high loads are staying relatively constant, but it's the summer where they're going up. But people almost always couched it to us in terms of, well, this is a way for us to help Tajikistan, right? Or it's almost less good for Pakistan than it is for the other regional partners, just because Pakistan has such an abundance of power generation in the winter months. So I don't know how much that really gets to the core of your question, but it didn't factor much into our discussions, so that reveals something in and of itself.
Can I?
Yeah.
I think I know Tapi and Abakasa and Tanpa from the Central Asia perspective. And from when I asked about that, about like a similar question, the sense that I got was that it was more of a political move, from especially with the new president in Mesoyoyo. It was a more political move that was in a way bringing Pakistan closer towards Central Asia. So, but I think it was more. I think what John said, what Sam said was right. That it was a good. I think the way to see it is also as a good kind of transition before Pakistan can start developing their own domestic supplies to energy, right? So like kind of fill in the gap before to go to the other side. But these are huge projects, and I was a little bit surprised at how much it didn't come up. If that makes sense. But for me, the sense that I got was it was more of a political, like a regional political alignment kind of question. If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, of course, Tapi is political. That's why it's taken 2 decades. Still, there is I don't think it will happen. I've been writing about it, but I still have a doubt, despite my influence, personally, not on behalf of ADP, that it's still the I part may not happen, because I asked from a minister, Indian minister who was visiting here. He talked at the Atlantic Council last year, and he said government is interested because of the politics of it, but the private sector will not invest in the energy supply and then energy import, and who will pay for that in the long run? So that's on the economy side of it. In terms of politics, they don't trust that Pakistan can anytime stop that flow. So that the India part, of course, is the big question mark. The Pakistan part is they have already concluded the pricing. The flow will start in Afghanistan toward the end of the year. ADB will fund Afghanistan, $100 million Afghanistan's construction port. Pakistan already, I think China or Saudi Arabia, someone will pay for them. But I was looking into long run, will Pakistan need this long run project, where they will find money for it. They also have a commitment with Iran, IP, that they haven't started building while they already signed a contract a long time ago. So, yeah.
Hi, my name is Johannes. I work for the Stimson Center South Asia program, and I just wanted to say thank you so much. It was a really interesting presentation. My question has to do with whether in your meetings, if any of you got a sense of what the tasks, like how we'll be able to measure the success of the task force, and kind of building off of what Aaron was saying earlier, will this just be like a concept that doesn't see the light of day? Is there any and if their task is just to identify the energy problems, how will this be effective, or will it be effective?
I don't know that people really gave us a measure for success with that. When we talked with people working on that reform initiative, it was mostly just, we're going to come up with solutions and we're going to put together a document, and however much gets implemented, that's success. And so, yeah, I don't know that there's any strict mark there.
I remember in the conversations that they wanted to make a plan that was extensive enough, and if those things were implemented, that would be kind of more systemic changes. But obviously implementation and adaptation would be generally a challenge. I think if you saw the Finance Ministry's recent budget document where they were trying to make kind of these large-scale changes, especially in the tariff, where they tried to put it on the full cost recovery mechanism and put it on the customers. I mean, that's how you do reduce circular debt, but is that politically viable? So I don't know exactly what the task force will come out with, but I'm hopeful that it'll be a little bit thoughtful about the longer term vision rather than just trying to reduce circular debt today.
And I would just add, if you look at the terms of reference for the task force, it's comically all-encompassing. It's like it basically encompasses everything in the energy space. That's probably a bad sign that it's not very focused. It did strike me that I think they genuinely have been given a pretty strong mandate, and there aren't a lot of other competing power centers in the government, although of course there are in the private sector and elsewhere. So we'll really see. I do think the one thing they're doing is pulling together a somewhat more coherent long-term planning document. But again, who knows whether that will happen. This government has not visibly gotten its act together on most any issue yet. This one's probably slightly more promising than the other sectors, but I think everyone's still sort of in a waiting game. That was true there in January. I think it's still true today on the macroeconomy, on the housing promises, on a number of sort of the core issues that the government ran on. This one, I think, in terms of the internal deliberations and some of the people they have is maybe a little bit further along, but jury's out.
Hi, my name is Ben Lamont. I was interested in hearing your take on the regional dimension of power in Pakistan, where it's generated versus where it's used, the extent to which regional rivalries manifest themselves in this sector.
Well, so with every conversation in Pakistan, someone explained to us the intrinsic differences between the Punjabis and the Baloch and the Sindhis and the Pathans and how they use the electricity. Why everyone else is responsible for the problems. But kind of more seriously, I think the bifurcation of the country into essentially two power markets, I think, is one of the main takeaways I think we have in how just Pakistan's basically the focus of all these renewable endowments in the south in particular really kind of informs the way Pakistan's moving forward. Thankfully we didn't delve too deeply into the issues that have to deal with demands in Balochistan, because that's a very fraught issue. But one that is increasingly receding as those endowments are disappearing, right? And kind of if you look towards the future, what's the endowment for the 21st century that's really going to kind of make or break the way the system is redistributed is these solar endowments and wind endowments that exist in Sindh and in southern Punjab, Bahawalpur and all that jazz. Now, in terms of, I think this is where the transmission and distribution part really comes in as well, just because of how broken the backbone of the country's power grid is. And so that's where I think a lot of this ability to rectify these regional imbalances and the solution that is going to come from, right, is increase the ability to wheel the electricity up and down the country. Because without that ability, you're really going to see this concern over this regional specialization, I think I'd say. But if someone else with a little more technical knowledge wants to touch it.
Just to add briefly to that, you'll see in our report we'll pass out at the end. We do have a solar irradiation map that shows, like everyone's been saying, how strong the solar really is in the south. But until that really does take off, assuming they will invest in that in one day, right now we were talking with the World Bank and they're really interested in hydro. And they're really planning to take advantage of melting glaciers in the Himalayas for the next couple of decades. They see
It's going to increase the speed of the water.
Yeah, and so that's up in the north, so we plan to see that probably play out in the next several years, while solar, wind, hopefully it'll improve in the south.
No, again, just to jump into that, I think one question we didn't get an answer to, which is a really interesting political economy question, is if there's more investment in Sindh with solar and with wind, are the people of Sindh going to benefit from that? Or, one, is it just going to all be wheeled up to the Punjab? But also, some of the biggest investors in renewable energy have been big family companies that want to get a better return on their investment in growing sectors, and the military-related foundations have also been very aggressive and very entrepreneurial in investing in these sectors because they have a lot of capital at their disposal. So again, even when you look at areas where there could be interesting investment in places like Sindh, you can ask political economy questions about who's going to ultimately benefit from those investments. Who might that be as much the disadvantaged people of Sindh?
And I guess just coming back from that generation issue is when we were talking about like reforms of the discos, a story that kept coming up time and time again was that a number of the discos kind of in the more developed and industrial and cohesive sectors, so basically IESCO in Islamabad and LESCO in Lahore, these are discos that we could really reform these, add more competition, add more market mechanisms, and they could actually probably become, at least not, if not actually profitable, close to profitable. The problem is the grid is so interconnected that you cannot move reforms forward in these areas without, it's really bankrupting everyone else. And so that, I think, is an important way into which the regionalization of reform kind of plays into a part, is that it really is a house divided on itself cannot stand, right? If you start taking pieces out, if you tried to create L electric and I electric, not only one, would they probably not work as K electric has shown, but two, it would further undermine the remainder of the grid.
I wonder if you guys had any, so the K electric model, did anybody talk to you about FESCO in Faisalabad? Because they turned around their recovery really well while keeping it a state-owned enterprise.
Right.
And so did you get any feedback on that at all?
Not so much, unless you remember. I don't remember being.
We got a little bit on FESCO, but people were kind of hand-wavy about the mechanisms by which that had happened.
Right.
Some of it was talking about like, the low-hanging fruit that people always talk about is, addressing non-technical losses.
Yes.
And that's what the government's focusing on, right? But that only gets you so far. And my understanding for FESCO was that they increased recovery, but they're still further in the red than IESCO and LESCO are.
They've managed to get, at least as far as their non-technical losses are concerned, they've brought it down to, they have almost 100% recovery from what NEPRA's own reports are saying in 2016-17, which is hugely impressive given that KE, which was depoliticized, right? So let's talk about privatization, but it was depoliticized, wasn't able to do that.
Right.
So it's very interesting that FESCO was able to overcome that while being a very power-hungry city. There's industries all over the place. I'm sure a lot of the domestic problems are the same. So it's interesting to see where even from the central ministry you'll get somewhat of a picture of where the problem areas are, but there are these like small, these actual success stories which you're not really hearing about. So I think FESCO's been one. I have a hunch about why it happened, but I think it'd be very interesting to do a study and see how they turned their recovery pattern around.
I think a lot of the issues that you're speaking to are so important.
Good, tell that to my committee.
Yeah, it's tough because a lot of those come down to how negotiations go during the unbundling process, right? It's about consultants appealing to different individuals, dealing with unions, dealing with government officials who have been guaranteed a salary for their whole life, and a large one. And so, I feel bad. I feel like we're not giving you a good enough answer for how to do
fine.
it.
I'm writing the book on this.
That's a really difficult question.
The onus is on me to give you something, hopefully. And I think it's great that you guys have taken the lead on this. I was actually just reading that Saudi Aramco signed a deal with Pakistan actually to sell off a lot of their LNG as well. So like you said, it's these. It's not a conspiracy, but these things have been put into place. Why are we emphasizing generation? If we have enough to go around, if it just means some people need to run less than 4 ACs, then why do we not have that? Why is that political will not available? Why did factories not become more efficient? There's really great sort of ways to unpack this problem. Yeah.
My only concern is that if you not to just say then let's stop generations or let's stop continuing generation, which happened before. So where you then, as you know, consumption increases, you don't have enough, and then you then flip again back to generations, which is where we are now, right? So
Well, I think there's a finite amount of political power or will in any given situation. So it really needs to come down to where you direct your energy. As Joshua said, I mean, we're not talking about conservation at all, right? So again, like from political economy point of view, you can only do so much within a tenure, and where you focus your energy. And I think part of it, I mean, as a political scientist, the messaging that you give people who come into your office, right? Like pounding this idea of theft. Why theft? Why do we care about theft so much, right? So these longer conversations about what really is the gap here.
And that's where I think integrated energy planning, that's why we opened our presentation with it, is because, there's the other thing that kind of came across over and over again was this cycle of boom and bust, boom and bust, boom and bust, right? And it almost, made me want to make, I really restrained from making a Game of Thrones reference in the presentation, but it really makes you want to break that wheel, right? You want to have kind of a consistent and long-term plan. The problem is, and this is something we brought up, right? We talked to the erudite energy task force people who say, so what's your plan to have this survive the day after Imran Khan, is not prime minister? They're like, well, we don't really have one. We're like, we'll make a good plan, and if it's good, people will keep it. And that's not a very convincing answer. And so everyone's always fighting the last war, right? And so the question is, we don't have an answer as to how they can effectively safeguard it, but I'm optimistic that there's increasing political consciousness among the decision-making class that there needs to be something more than let's every 2 to 3 years reinvent everything.
And they've done that for some things.
Right.
There's some really good political scientists right now who are working on cash transfer programs that have survived multiple governments. You've probably heard of BISP. So there's a Pakistani political scientist over at Brown who's studying exactly that. How is it that they even let Benazir's name stay on it,
Right.
in spite of the fact that it's a Nawaz government? And so again, like the politics of this are really fascinating.
One of the things I really find interesting about this specific government is that there's a lot of brain games that's happening. A lot of people who are like really high up in their fields abroad are coming back to Pakistan. Maybe some for vested interest as well, but also have the technical and leadership and all the things that they need to kind of reverse or optimize or innovate the system, which I think is a lot more hopeful and for this current government and what could be done. I'm actually pretty excited for all the people who've recently joined to see what they are hopefully able to do. Fingers crossed.
We're out of time, but I'm really grateful that all of you came to listen to such a esoteric but very profoundly important topic. And I've been going to Pakistan for about 15 years and spent a lot of time experiencing power cuts firsthand during the summer in Lahore and elsewhere. So this was actually the first time when I went on this trip that I understood my experience as part of the boom and bust cycle of Pakistani investment. And I think that the team did a good job. They got no credit, no academic credit for this. They went to Pakistan for a couple of weeks, came back, immersed themselves in this topic, and I think were able to get their hands around a topic that it's difficult to know where to start pulling the thread on the problem. So I give them a lot of credit for that, and I give you credit for coming out here and listening to it. And I hope this will be the first of a lot of events we do on energy and environment issues in Pakistan. We have some things planned for the coming year as well on this theme. So there will be food materializing imminently on that back table, which you should stay around for. But thank you again for coming and for being part of the conversation.